Today's critique examines a highly passionate video script defending the legacy of Charlie Kirk while exploring the creator's personal political awakening and shift away from the Democratic Party.
Streamlining the narrative arc will significantly amplify the impact of the central message. You've brought an immense amount of passion to this script, which is a really fantastic starting point, but right now, that passion is translating into a stream of consciousness approach that is honestly going to give your audience absolute whiplash.
Yeah, it jumps around quite a bit.
Right. When we look at how the script flows, it jumps aggressively from point to point without a clear unifying track, because you start off strong by reacting to videos of two individuals defending Charlie Kirk. And that sets up a very clear, engaging premise. The viewer thinks, okay, we're evaluating Kirk's legacy. But almost immediately you pivot away from that entirely and dive into your personal history of dropping out of 3 junior college.
And before the audience can even process that personal backstory, you launch them into a historical breakdown of Abraham Lincoln and the political landscape of the 1850s.
Yes.
Then, out of nowhere, there is a completely jarring tangent about October 7th. And finally, the script veers off into modern debates over transgender athletes and city council meetings. The core issue here is that all of these disparate elements are competing for the viewer's attention. And because they're all fighting to be the main topic, they end up drowning each other out. And the listener inevitably loses that foundational thread you started with, which was defending Charlie Kirk's legacy.
Exactly. You have all these distinct cultural grievances and historical deep dives, and it just feels like you're trying to cover every single aspect of your entire political worldview in one single video.
Which is a lot for one script.
It's way too much. If a viewer clicks on a thumbnail or a title expecting an analysis of Charlie Kirk, and 10 minutes later they're listening to a breakdown of local city council policies, their cognitive flow is entirely disrupted. They're going to click away. You have to guide the audience step by step rather than pulling them in a dozen different directions.
So how do we fix this? You need to completely reorganize this script into distinct, logically progressing thematic blocks that intentionally build upon one another. To do this effectively, you have to be ruthless. Any tangential cultural grievance that does not directly serve your core thesis, which is analyzing Kirk's legacy and your specific political shift regarding that legacy, it has to be trimmed.
Yep.
You need to create a dedicated, rigid structure. Think of it like building a house. You need a solid foundation before you start adding the roof.
Let's talk about what that looks like in practice. A great way to implement this is to establish a clear Act 1. Take those reaction videos and your direct defense of Charlie Kirk's work and group them entirely into this opening block.
Right.
By doing this, you're delivering exactly what the premise of the video promises right out of the gate. You give the audience a solid anchor. They know exactly what they are watching, why they are watching it, and what the stakes are.
And once you have them hooked with that first act, you need a smooth transition. And this brings me to my favorite part of your entire script, the incredible personal anecdote about the coffee shop in the Bay Area.
Oh, that was...
You talk about sitting there with your laptop screen physically slanted away from the room, absolutely terrified that your headphones might disconnect while you were listening to Ben Shapiro, just paralyzed by the fear of being outed as a conservative. That is such a deeply vivid, relatable piece of visual storytelling. It's brilliant.
It really is. It perfectly captures the modern-day stigma of conservatism that you are trying to discuss. So use that compelling personal anecdote as your direct transitional bridge into your Act 2. Use that feeling of having to hide your political exploration as the jumping-off point to actually explore the history. That second act can then focus exclusively on the historical exploration of the party platform.
Yeah, that works perfectly.
Do you see how naturally that flows? You move the audience seamlessly from your modern-day personal anxiety in a coffee shop straight into the historical context you want to unpack.
It builds an actual narrative arc. But to make that arc work, we have to talk about what needs to be left on the cutting room floor.
Right, the trims.
You have to completely remove the brief tangent about October 7th. You also need to cut that extended riff at the very end regarding city council meetings, X-rated content, and gender politics in sports. I know you're clearly passionate about these topics, and they might make for great content in a different video, but here they severely distract from your stated purpose.
Yeah.
They're taking up valuable real estate that should be dedicated to your analysis of Kirk's views on race. Cut them entirely, keep the focus tight, and your core message will hit so much harder.
Anchoring broad historical claim with precise, verifiable references builds unbreakable credibility with the audience. That brings us to the next major hurdle in the script, the completeness and focus of your evidence. Right now, there is a heavy reliance on generalizations, broad assumptions, and in some cases, self-admittedly flawed citations.
Yeah, there is a specific moment in your script that really stood out where you attempt to cite a political scientist and you actually say in the script, "I'm stealing this from Carol Swain and I'm going to completely butcher this."
Which is a huge red flag for a viewer.
Absolutely. On top of that, your script relies heavily on the reaction videos of other YouTubers to definitively prove that Charlie Kirk isn't racist. You are essentially using secondary reactions to prove a negative, while simultaneously bringing up massive, sweeping historical claims about Lyndon B. Johnson, the political shifts of the 1850s, and the KKK, all without providing any concrete primary sourcing.
The problem with this approach is that it leaves your entire argument highly vulnerable to immediate dismissal. If a skeptic is watching your video and you make a massive historical claim without backing it up, they are just going to roll their eyes and turn it off. They are going to demand proof for such weighty assertions. Your conviction is clear, and your passion is obvious, but conviction alone does not win historical debates.
Exactly. So the move here is to systematically fortify all of your historical and political assertions with exact quotes, precise dates, and direct primary sources. The entire focus of your revision phase should be on this concept of showing the receipts.
Yes.
When you are tackling controversial or highly debated historical topics, especially if you are framing this as a journey of uncovering hidden political truths, constructing a robust, bulletproof argument isn't just a good idea, it's mandatory. It commands respect. Even your fiercest detractors will have to pause and listen because they cannot easily wave away a direct, verifiable fact.
Let's apply this to your script. Instead of apologizing for butchering Carol Swain's point on the historical shifts in political parties, you need to take the time during your research phase to find the exact source. Go find her exact words.
Right. Don't guess.
Insert a direct, accurate one-sentence quote from Swain regarding the 70-day filibuster of the Civil Rights Act. Don't summarize her and apologize for getting it wrong. Quote her verbatim. It completely transforms a moment of self-doubt into a moment of undeniable authority. You go from sounding like someone half remembering a podcast to sounding like a researcher who knows exactly what they are talking.
It's a massive upgrade in credibility. You also need to apply this to your claims about Charlie Kirk himself. At one point, you simply claim that Charlie Kirk did more for Black Americans than most. That is a massive, highly subjective claim.
Yeah.
If you leave it that vague, it sounds like hyperbole, and the audience will treat it as such. Instead, insert a specific factual example. Name a specific program, a scholarship, or a precise initiative that Turning Point USA ran. Point to a tangible metric. Did they raise a specific dollar amount? Did they fund a specific community center? Give me an objective piece of evidence that supports the claim. When you ground the hyperbole in reality, it becomes infinitely harder for a critic to dispute.
And it proves that you've done the work. The same logic applies when you mention that you heard Kirk say some of the most uplifting things in various clips. That's a great sentiment. But again, it's entirely filtered through your subjective experience. Instead of just summarizing that sentiment, include a direct quote from Charlie Kirk himself that demonstrates these uplifting concepts.
Put his actual words on the screen. Let the listener hear or read the exact phrasing Kirk used, rather than relying entirely on secondary reaction channels to validate it. Allow the listener to evaluate the primary source firsthand. It shows that you trust your audience to interpret the raw data, and it proves that your conclusions are based on actual evidence, not just the vibe of a reaction video.
Calibrating the rhetorical tone to anticipate and disarm skeptical listeners will vastly increase the persuasive power of the material.
This is a huge point.
It is. This is perhaps the most crucial area of opportunity for this script, and it all comes down to audience alignment and fulfilling your actual purpose. Right now, the tonal execution relies heavily on polarizing hyperbole and the immediate, sometimes mocking dismissal of opposing views. Throughout the text, you use terms like demonic mass psychosis, scam, and derogatory nicknames like Queen Cackle or Scamala.
You also explicitly state in the script that your goal is to reach people who are currently where you used to be, people who are on what you refer to as the Democratic plantation. You want to reach the person who has been told Charlie Kirk is racist,
but who might be open to seeing another side. But here's the critical disconnect. This heavy-handed, combative style actively alienates that exact listener.
It really does. If I am someone who leans left, or even if I am just a centrist who is skeptical of Charlie Kirk, and I hear you call my political side demonic, or refer to a politician as a degenerate, or Queen Cackles, my defensive walls go up instantly.
Instantly.
That aggressive language immediately triggers a defensive mechanism. It is undeniably effective language if you just want to preach to the already converted and get cheers from the base, but it builds a massive wall between you and the persuadable skeptic. You are trying to build a bridge, but you are using dynamite to do it.
The solution is to adopt a much more constructively skeptical approach to counter-arguments. Rather than attacking the opposing side as delusional or brainwashed, you should acknowledge exactly why someone might hold those opposing views, validate that confusion, empathize with it, and then, once you have lowered their defenses, systematically and calmly dismantle that viewpoint with the newfound, heavily researched evidence we just talked about.
Let's look at how to execute this tone shift practice. When you are addressing the widespread accusation that Kirk or the conservative platform is racist, don't just call the critics crazy. Briefly and neutrally articulate why critics make that claim in the first place.
Right.
You could cite a specific media narrative or acknowledge a heavily circulated out-of-context clip that a lot of people have seen. By demonstrating that you fully understand the opposing argument, you disarm the skeptic. They think, okay, this person actually understands where I'm coming from. Then you use your own walkaway research to methodically explain why that interpretation lacks crucial context.
You guide them out of the maze rather than yelling at them for being lost. To do this, you absolutely must remove the name-calling entirely. Go through the script and strip out terms like scumagala and degenerate. Replace those ad hominem attacks with objective critiques of policy outcomes.
Yes.
For instance, you briefly mention historical statistics of household intactness when arguing that welfare reform created dependency. Lean into that. Present the data clearly, and let the numbers generate the sense of outrage or tragedy in the listener. Adjectives and nicknames weaken your argument, but raw, staggering data strengthens it immensely. Let the reality of the situation do the heavy lifting, not your insults.
Some people might worry that removing the fiery language makes the script less entertaining, but I would argue it makes it far more impactful because it allows you to replace hostility with vulnerability, which is profoundly more persuasive. There is a brilliant, fleeting moment in your script where you admit that you yourself once thought Trump was a racist and that you relied on the system to do your thinking for you. You need to expand heavily on that moment.
That is the emotional core of your entire script. Lean much heavier into your genuine empathy for that perspective. Use that shared vulnerability as a rhetorical tool. Invite the skeptical listener in by saying, I used to think exactly like you. I used to believe the exact same things you believe right now. And here is the specific evidence that changed my mind.
Exactly.
When you approach it that way, you aren't lecturing them from a pedestal of absolute certainty. You're sitting down next to them and walking them through your own awakening. Vulnerability is the ultimate key to persuasion.
To quickly recap our analysis today, we really focused on 3 core areas to elevate this highly passionate script and make it as persuasive as possible. First, we discussed streamlining your narrative structure into logical thematic blocks, specifically emphasizing the need to remove tangential cultural grievances so you can keep the focus incredibly tight on your core thesis.
Second, we address the necessity of fortifying your broad historical claims. We want to move away from generalizations, flawed citations, and secondary reactions, and instead anchor your arguments with precise, verifiable primary sources. Show the receipts.
And finally, we explored the critical importance of calibrating your script's tone. We talked about removing the polarizing name-calling and hyperbole and replacing it with empathy and data so that you can successfully persuade skeptical listeners rather than just rallying the people who already agree with you.
To put these insights into motion here is your actionable summary. First, explicitly outline your script into a rigid 3-act structure to manage the flow of your argument, using your coffee shop anecdote as the bridge. Second, take the time to look up and paste in the exact Carol Swain quote, as well as specific tangible metrics for Turning Point USA's initiatives. And third, perform a dedicated tone pass over the entire document, systematically removing any alienating name-calling and replacing it with data-driven critiques and your own personal empathy.
We warmly invite you to implement these structural, evidentiary, and tonal revisions to your script. Once you have made those updates, please submit the revised material back in for a follow-up critique so we can see how it evolves.